Hello everybody, it's Carol Garrison with Carol's Creative Escape. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy week to catch this video. It's time for another Make It Monday, and my name is Carol Garrison, and I have been an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator for, well, it'll be 10 years this week. I've loved every minute of it, and my favorite thing to do is show others that they can be creative simply by how you stamp, put pieces of paper together, and show everybody you can create absolutely beautiful cards. And so basically I like to help people spread joy one card at a time. And tonight we're going to do that with another fun fold. I have a couple of examples for you that I've already made using the Sun Prints Designer Series paper, and then I am going to walk you through one final example of showing you how to make this card using the Boughs of Holly Designer Series paper. So let me go ahead and get started here. I'm just going to move that out of the way, and I'll start by showing you the two examples that I've created. And basically what I've used is in this, the beautiful prints or Sun Prints Designer Series paper, there's basically a blue tone card designer paper and then the gray granite designer series paper. So let me start by showing you this one. This is obviously the gray granite designer series paper color, and I've used the perch in the tree, just this little bird and that stamp. And then what I did was just take a one of the watercolor brushes, and I dipped it in the tray of the gray granite ink pad, and I was able to just pull some color through to add a little bit of color. And then when you open this card up, I use the stamp set, the sentiment from this stamp set as well. Your kindness warms my heart. And so we've made a nice thank you card. At the end of the holidays, we might need one or two of those. And then I used the metallic pearls. I actually used the soft succulent color just to add a little, they're actually the red and green, I'm sorry, not metallic, but the red and green adhesive back pearls. And I used that soft succulent just to add a little pop of color to the card without taking away from it. So that's one of the cards. And then here's the blue version of that card. And this one has the Pacific Point cardstock as its primary color. Initially, I thought I could use Starry Sky because that is one of the colors in this set. And when I matched it up, I did not like it. So I went with the Pacific Point because that pulled out the color. I thought Night of Navy might make it just a little bit too dark. And then for the sentiment on the front of this card, I used the Wishes for a Beautiful Birthday from the Framed Florets stamp set, and also this little Celebrate stamp on the inside. So let's go ahead and get started. Make sure you've got a piece of paper and a pencil or pen with you, because I will read off measurements as we're going through this card. Again, if I would encourage you to go ahead and make your own template for this card. Don't worry about anything matching, anything like that. And that way, if you want to go back and make this card, you can do that. But in the meantime, I will give you measurements here so you can even make your own beautiful card. We're going to make another thank you card today. And to start with, for the measurements on this card, you need a piece of cardstock that measures 5.5 inches by 7.25 inches. And you're going to score it at the 3-inch mark. So again, 5.5 inches by 7.25 inches, scored at 3. I'm using soft succulent as my card base here. And then you're going to need another piece. Now, the directions called for originally a 1.5 inch piece of cardstock. And what I discovered is I could get, when I trimmed off this, I had enough that I could get a piece that's just slightly smaller. This one happens to be 1.5 inches, but to make better use of your paper, if you want, you can just use that scrap from when you cut this down to 7.25 off your 8.5 inch piece, and then that strip actually ends up being about 1.25 inches. that will work fine too. And then you're making the most out of your paper. So you can see this is just about a 1/4 inch narrower than this piece will be. Either one's going to work fine, but if you want to make the most of your paper, you can just use that scrap and cut it down to the 4 inches and you'll be fine. This also is measuring, like I said, 1.5 by 4 inches, and it's scored at 1 inch. But the 1 1/4 inch scrap that you get works just fine too, scored at 1 inch still there as well. Hope that makes sense. All right, and then you're going to need 2 more pieces of cardstock that measure 3 1/4 by 3 1/4. So you need 2 of those. And then you are going to need 2 pieces of designer series paper. I happen to be using this beautiful glimmer paper. And these are going to measure 3 by 3. Sorry, I want to make sure I get that right. And because I'm working with glitter, I'm going to be using my liquid glue to make sure that I get my next layer to attach to the glimmer paper. And then you will need a piece of cardstock. I cut mine down to match the sentiment that I'm using, because then I could get some of that glimmer paper to show. And so the square that I'm using is going to be measuring, I believe it's 2 1/4 by 2 1/4, but you can really make that, yeah, it's 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. But you can make this layer however big or small you need it to fit your sentiment. So on this one, I made it 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. This one, I've dropped it down. I believe it was, oh, it happens to be 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 also. It's totally up to you, and it's going to be based off your sentiment. And then you need another piece of the designer series paper that measures 4 by 5 1/4. That's going to be on the inside of your card. And then you'll need a piece of basic white cardstock that measures 2 5/8 by 5 inches. And I'm finding sometimes even, I left this one at 2 5/8, but I'm actually going to shrink it down 1/8 of an inch to 2 1/2. Then I don't run into any issues with it hanging out just a little bit, and I get a better border around that. I kind of found that out as I was making those other cards. So this is just going to go right here. And then when it closes, you won't have any of the white hanging out. And then finally, the last piece that you need is this piece of designer series paper. And this one measures 2 3/4 by 5 1/4. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on, first thing I'm going to do actually is stamp the sentiment. And on this one, I want to emboss in a matching color, but I want it to be colored as I emboss. So I am going to get out my Stamparatus. I've already placed my stamp on the front plate here. And so what I'm going to do is just take a little piece of my, I had to find it here, a little bit of adhesive, and sure, I'm going to. A little bit of adhesive on the back, and then I just take my finger to it a few times. You can press it up to your clothing just so that you can de-stick it a little bit. And I'm putting it right up into the corner. I like to do that because then if my paper shifts at all, I'm going to be able to get it to go back in place. Then I'm going to take my Evening Evergreen ink pad, and I'm going to stamp it on top of, oh, I'm having problems getting that T on the edge because I'm so close to the edge. There we go. I'm going to ink up my image. And I'm just going to close it on my Stamparatus. Now, one of the things that I have found when I'm embossing, I'll see I didn't press down there very well. That's the nice thing about the Stamparatus, is I can go back and get that spot. and have everything line up. I have found that when I'm doing this technique, I prefer to stamp the image twice in whatever my base color is going to be. I just find I get a deeper coloring, and so that works for me. And again, because you're using the Stamparatus, make sure to cover that T this time. You can do that without worrying that it isn't going to line up again. Okay, so I've got that part done. Get the ink out of the way here, and then I need to take my chamois, and I'm just going to fold it in half and drag it across here so that it gets all the ink out. I like to keep mine, when I'm doing this technique, my chamois cloth just a little bit drier. That way I don't have to worry about there being too much moisture on this when I go back and put my Versamark on. So again, I'm going to make sure I get that T. And I'm just going over this with my Versamark. And putting it down. And again, just like I did with the ink, when I'm using the Versamark, I am also going to stamp this twice just to make sure I've got good coverage. I'd hate to go to all this work only to have a spot that didn't quite get covered as I thought. Okay, so there we go with that. And then I can just pull this off of here and set that aside. When you use Versamark on that, you do want to clean it right away. And then I find if I just run it in water with a little bit of like Dawn dish soap, something like that, a gentle soap, then I can easily make sure all the residue is off. And then I am just going to take a piece of, actually, I've got little, this is like the little mat that can go in your oven. And I like this for using with the embossing powder. The reason I'm not using the silicone mat is the embossing powder does stick to this, whereas on this mat, it tends to just slide off real easy. So it's a simple way for me to get it back in the jar. I also use a large, or not a large, but a small plastic container. I can't find where my clear embossing powder ended up right now in that little container. So this is my next best solution. And so I get that covered with the embossing paper or the embossing powder, and then I can just pick this up and real easily create a funnel and dump it back in here. And the majority of it comes off. I can flick it over my trash can and it's clean again. Personally, I like using that little container because then I'm not wasting any of it. When I flick it off, it's going right back in there. But when you can't find stuff, you can't find stuff. So now next thing I'm going to do is take my heat tool, and because this is a small piece of paper, I'm going to use a clothespin, decorated it with some washi tape from a long time ago. And then I'm just gonna go over this with my heat tool. If you haven't ever embossed like this before, that magic moment when everything starts to melt and get dark, that's my favorite part of embossing, is seeing it all melt and turn nice and shiny here. Okay, turn that off. And there we go. We've got our embossed image. Now I can set that aside and just let it cool. And then we will start to assemble our card here. So first thing first is we're going to do the easy piece, and that's just putting this in here. You know what? I wanted to check. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to take my seal. Make sure you use a light touch in kind of that check mark. The lighter your touch is, the less likely you're going to have your adhesive gum up on you and kind of stop. I know that can be frustrating And so if you use a light touch, it's a good thing. All right, and then I'm just going to follow up again with the same light touch and check mark for my basic white. And I want to put that so there's a nice even border on 3 sides here. And before I press it down, I'm just going to close it to make sure it doesn't hang out. And then I can get it stuck in place there. Shoot, I forgot one key step. Good. This is still going to work. We needed to put this piece on first. So I'm just going to, for some reason, I didn't have a lot of adhesive on this side, working out in my favor. So I'm going to lift it up because we actually want to add adhesive to this strip. And I'm going to do 2 strips. And what you want to do is center this going up and down and put your score line right on the edge. I eyeball it, but if you have this edge 2 1/8 of an inch and this edge 2 1/8 of an inch from top to bottom, it's a pretty good centering. And then, because I lucked out, I'm just going to add one more strip of adhesive here to attach this layer of cardstock. Phew! Don't you love it when you goof and it works that easy to fix it? I like to do it this way because I've seen it done so it's on the back. I kind of like the back of my card to look nice too. So by doing that, I'm covering most of that flap up with my designer series paper. If push came to shove, I would have shoved it on the back and it would have been fine. But personally, I like it better the other way. All right, and then we can open this up and we're going to put our adhesive on the back of this piece of designer series paper. And just make sure that you put it on. If you've got a directional designer series paper, you wouldn't want your trees going on upside down. So just make sure that you're putting that on the right direction. Okay, and then the next thing that we're going to do is layer our glimmer paper. And this is just going to be on the inside, so I'm not putting anything on top of this glimmer for the inside of the card. So I'm not worried about using the adhesive, the liquid glue, because the back side will adhere very nicely. All right, and then again, I'll do that same process with this layer. And that'll go on to, oh, I got a little bit of adhesive here. Stuff is getting stuck on it. Okay. And so I'll center that square onto here, and I'm just going to burnish it in. And then the next thing that we want to do is let's add our liquid glue to the back of this. Now, you want to make sure you're getting it in the corners, but you don't want to put so much on that it oozes out, especially onto the glimmer paper, because it'll instantly dull that glimmer paper. But the other nice thing about using this liquid glue is if I don't have it quite centered, it's going to let me move it just a little bit so that I get it on straight and in the center. And then I'm going to turn it over. I like to turn it over when I'm adhering it, just so that I don't get any glue, if I happen to have any on my finger, or ink like I do, that I don't get it onto the actual card piece here. All right, and then the final step, these 2 pieces are actually going to get adhered together over this piece, but I have found in doing this that I'm better off adhering one layer at a time and actually putting my adhesive on here to start with. You want to make sure you've got this on straight and centered as well. And so I like to be able to move it around just a little bit if I need to. And so I'm going to go up to, about right here on this piece. You want like a finger's width, not covered. And then I know if I center it top to bottom and have the same amount of space when the card is open, I'm going to be good on my centering. And so I'm going to put that piece on here, lift it up, and then I will put this piece on here. But again, before I do it, I just want to make sure I've got it straight and centered pretty good. And I think I'm okay with that. So now I can fill this up with adhesive. I'm using a little more adhesive than I normally would, simply because I want to make sure this sticks. So I've gone horizontal with my adhesive on this piece. I'm going to go ahead and go vertical on this other piece. That way it kind of gets the adhesive spread out over the bulk of the square here. Okay, so then when I put this down, the easiest way for me is just to start by lining up this corner and this corner so that that edge is straight and not crooked on there. And then I can just set it down, and that's how I get that lined up and keep it centered on the card. And that is how you make this card. So there's a fair amount of cutting ahead of time, you know, little pieces, little steps to it. But it really is a simple card to make. And look how beautiful. You know, I've got a thank you card. This is another thank you card with that cute little bird on a branch. Done some embossing here. And it just makes a really simple, really easy card. But again, an elegantly simple card. And anybody that receives this card is going to be impressed with your stamping skills and your card making skills. So, don't really have a name for this fold. I guess you could call it a flat fold card if you want to. If you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment and I'll get back to you on that. Otherwise, I will post measurements in the comment section of the video, or in the description of the video, so that you can easily get those again. And if you do make a card using this fold, please post it in the comments down below. That way, anybody that's watching this video can get inspired by what you've done with this layout as well. Thanks, everybody, and have a great week. We'll see you next week on Make It Monday. Bye-bye.